Beneath the pages of official history, there are corridors no light has touched, where locked doors hide records meant to decay in silence. The voices here speak in coded margins, in ink that bleeds like a wound across decades. Every artifact, every name, is a splinter from a truth too jagged to hold. Step closer, and you'll hear the machinery of secrets still turning, long after the war was declared over. On January 17, 1944, the Soviet Third Belarusian Front breached the outer defenses of Königsberg, advancing street by street through ice-slick rubble and pockets of desperate Wehrmacht resistance. Official accounts speak of ammunition dumps and ration stores seized in the subterranean cellars, but the after-action reports filed by Major Ivan M. Kornev mention something different: an armed detachment operating without divisional markings, accompanied by 2 men in civilian overcoats. Their orders, Kornev later wrote, came directly from Stavka, the Soviet High Command. These men were searching for something beneath a gutted municipal archive near Bergstrasse. The building's lower levels had been reinforced with poured concrete and armored doors. It took 6 hours of explosives and welding torches to open the largest chamber. Inside were steel crates lined with lead and stacked on wooden pallets. Each bore the same marking, a black 5-pointed star within a circle, flanked by the Gothic letters MS. The soldiers guarding the site ordered the regular infantrymen out, sealing the entrance behind them. Kornev's report states that a German-speaking civilian identified only as Drive S supervised the inventory. No detailed list survives, but a later requisition form filed in Moscow mentions component assemblies Morgenstern and heavy containment units, mass 52 kilograms EA. The crates were loaded onto 3 Studebaker US-6 trucks, part of a Lend-Lease convoy, and moved under blackout to a rail siding east of the city. Kornev followed the convoy as far as Tapio before his orders instructed him to return to Königsberg. The shipment's subsequent route is undocumented in Soviet logistics archives. British SIS records, partially declassified in 1998, suggest a parallel Allied effort. Signals intercepted from RAF Chiksans on January 19 indicate that an Mi-6 field unit, operating under the cover of the 30th Assault Unit, was attempting to locate German tactical fissile research under codename Grey ASH. One cable mentions competing Soviet retrieval efforts already underway, probable Morgenstern correlation. A second, dated February 1, states, target assets presumed secured by Russian special detail. No physical interception possible without breach of protocol. In 1956, during Khrushchev's visit to London, a Foreign Office memorandum referenced persistent inquiries from British intelligence into the fate of the Morgenstern material. The Soviet delegation denied knowledge of the term. Accounts from former Soviet ordnance handlers, collected decades later by Russian historian Alexei Vronsky, point toward an unexplained cluster of discharges and demobilizations among personnel attached to the Königsberg operation. One sergeant, Viktor Borodin, described in a taped interview a shipment that could not be approached without shielding. He claimed the trucks were guarded not only by NKVD troops but by men from the Science Ministry, wearing heavy gloves and carrying radiation counters. No surviving German documentation on Project Morgenstern has been verified, though fragments attributed to Reich Armaments engineer Dr. Otto Fellmann surfaced in the Bundesarchiv in 1983. These include an incomplete diagram of a spherical device labeled Primarkörper and notations on U-235M. Fellmann himself disappeared in March 1945. His last confirmed location was a Luftwaffe airfield at Rechlin. Rumors persist in Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, that one of the original Morgenstern crates was never evacuated. In 1992, construction workers excavating near the Pregel River unearthed a corroded steel container, its seal intact, matching wartime Soviet descriptions. Local authorities quickly sealed off the area, citing hazardous industrial waste. No photographs were released, and the site is now beneath a privately owned warehouse. Historians who have examined the scattered documentary evidence note a disturbing pattern. Every known witness with direct knowledge of the crate's contents either died prematurely or was removed from active service. Kornev himself was transferred to a desk post in Smolensk by summer 1944 and died in 1948, officially of pneumonia. To this day, neither Moscow nor London acknowledges the existence of Project Morgenstern. The full manifest, if it survives, remains locked in classified archives. The nature of the Black Star-marked devices, whether components of an experimental nuclear weapon, a radiological dispersal device, or an entirely different technology, is still unknown. The only certainty is that both Allied and Soviet intelligence considered them worth risking men's lives to recover in the final, chaotic months of the war. On June 4, 1952, at the port of Trieste, a crew of Italian dockworkers renovating an abandoned customs warehouse on Via dei Bonomo tore down a false partition. Behind it lay a dark, dust-thick room filled with 10 wooden crates. The markings were faded, but under a layer of grime, the black stencils became visible: Reichsadler insignia, Kriegsmarine property stamps, and the word U-Boot-Dienststelle in Gothic script. One of the foremen, Carlo Pavin, pried open a crate expecting scrap metal. Instead, he found a stack of salt-crusted logbooks, each wrapped in wax paper and tied with fraying cord. They were written in German, the covers marked with hull numbers and dates stretching from late 1944 to May 1945, a period when official records claim many U-boats had already been scuttled or surrendered. Another crate contained heavily corroded Enigma rotors and Typex-like cipher wheels, the brass tarnished but intact. The smallest box, carefully cushioned in straw, held several sealed film canisters with handwritten labels, Sturmlicht I-4. Before Pavin's team could continue opening the remaining crates, the site was visited by 2 men identifying themselves as officers of the Guardia di Finanza. The men examined the find briefly, then ordered all work to stop. Within 24 hours, the warehouse was placed under NATO security cordon. Local police logs from the period confirmed the presence of foreign military liaison personnel, but the nationality is not stated. The dockworkers were interviewed separately, then told their services were no longer required. On June 9, at 2:40, a fire broke out in the warehouse. Fire brigade records note accelerants present and rapid spread consistent with petroleum-based agents. The official cause was filed as accidental, likely sparked by electrical faults. However, photographs recovered from a private album belonging to Pavin, later donated anonymously to the Museo del Mare in Trieste, suggest otherwise. One image shows 2 of the Sturmlicht reels unspooled across a table, their frames depicting aerial views of multiple cities. One was clearly recognizable as Hamburg in 1943, another appeared to be London's Docklands. But 2 others showed sprawling urban grids that historians could not match to any known European city from the era. One photograph even seemed to depict a coastal settlement whose modern counterpart would not be built until the 1970s. Declassified NATO maritime surveillance documents from 1977 briefly reference Trieste Case File 52-06 in connection with unidentified German photographic reconnaissance overflights. A redacted paragraph mentions incongruous topographic features inconsistent with temporal context, suggesting the images captured something, or someplace, outside conventional wartime records. The pages following this note are missing from the file. Survivor testimony from Pavin's co-worker, Luigi Bernardi, recorded in 1985, adds a strange layer. Bernardi recalled that the Enigma rotors found in one crate didn't match the usual configurations shown to them later by an Italian naval historian. The internal wiring patterns were unfamiliar, and several were marked with a letter Z in red paint, a designation absent from known cipher machine inventories. By the end of summer 1952, all official references to the crates had disappeared from port authority registers. The surviving dockworkers were offered relocation packages to other Italian ports, Genoa, Bari, Naples, under the pretext of operational reorganization. None were allowed to continue work in Trieste. In 1964, an American naval intelligence memorandum surfaced in the Pentagon's declassification process, only to be reclassified within months. It contained a grainy microfilm scan of one Sturmlicht frame, labeled Anomaly Number 3. The location was unidentified, but the note, possible pre/post target recon, was typed beneath it. The fact that the timestamp on the edge of the film was 1945-07-18, more than 2 months after Germany's surrender, has never been explained. Today, nothing remains of the original warehouse. The lot is occupied by a private shipping company with opaque ownership structures linked to holding firms in Luxembourg. Requests for access to the NATO file have been repeatedly denied under Article 4 of the NATO security policy. What Sturmlicht depicted, why U-boat logbooks from beyond the war's official timeline existed, and who ordered the destruction of the crates remain unanswered questions, buried somewhere between maritime intelligence archives and the scorched timbers of a warehouse fire no one believes was accidental. On April 29, 1945, an unmarked train departed Görlitz under heavy SS guard. Witnesses along the route into the Sudetenland later testified that the train bore no unit insignia, only a black diagonal stripe painted on each carriage. Its escort detail, wearing Feldgrau uniforms stripped of rank badges, carried submachine guns and spoke little to locals. The train's manifest, found decades later in a partially burned station ledger at Hradec nad Nisou, listed the cargo simply as Material V-17. Abteilung V-17, as identified in scattered surviving Reich records, was a clandestine research division reporting directly to the SS Forschungsgemeinschaft. Soviet intelligence intercepts from January 1945 linked the unit to advanced nerve agent dissemination prototypes and experimental pressure tank systems. Several scientists attached to V-17, including Dr. Helmut Zobel and engineer Karl-Heinz Moritz, disappeared in the final weeks of the war. The Görlitz train was last seen entering the mountainous tunnel network between Liberec and the Bohemian border on May 1. No Allied or Soviet post-war inventory ever recorded its capture. In September 1945, a Red Army sapper unit under Captain Anatoly Kiselev mapped the same tunnel complex and found several sections collapsed, either by demolition or natural cave-in. Two of Kiselev's men reported metallic drums lodged in rockfalls, but their commander ordered the passages sealed without further excavation. Declassified Czechoslovak state security reports from the 1960s mention localized Geiger counter spikes and chemical hazard indicators during mining surveys in the area. In February 1978, miner František Král unearthed a sealed steel container stamped with the Reichsadler and the word Gefahrstoff, hazardous material. The drum seams were encased in amber-colored resin, and its weight required 3 men to move it. Within a week, Král was hospitalized with acute respiratory distress and skin blistering. Doctors at Liberec Regional Hospital noted symptoms consistent with exposure to organophosphate compounds, but no official cause was recorded. Král died within the month. His medical file vanished from the archives. A classified Warsaw Pact memorandum dated April 14, 1979, refers to legacy German chemical weapon caches of unknown configuration and persistent Soviet directives against civilian access to Sudeten tunnels. The document warns that at least 5 sealed containers remain unaccounted for, possibly buried within uncharted side passages. Local oral history holds that the train was part of Action Silbergen, an evacuation of sensitive research from Silesia as Soviet forces closed in. While Silbergen appears nowhere in official Nazi files, a captured SS adjutant's diary, preserved in the Bundesarchiv, notes on April 27, priority on V-17 cargo. Transit via Tunnel B-4 before final order. No survivors outside core group. In 1991, following the collapse of Czechoslovakia's communist government, a Czech journalist, Pavel Horsky, gained limited access to Liberec district archives. Among the records was a grainy 1945 reconnaissance photograph showing the tunnel entrance on the day of the train's passage. A plume of smoke rises from the opposite slope, suggesting controlled demolition. Horsky's subsequent articles were abruptly halted after an alleged meeting with representatives from Prague, and he left journalism within the year. Present-day satellite scans reveal subsidence patterns consistent with large voids beneath the area. However, environmental agencies cite unstable geology and hazardous contamination in denying excavation permits. Independent researchers have attempted ground-penetrating radar surveys, but security patrols, officially tasked with preventing accidents, regularly confiscate equipment. Whatever Abteilung V-17 was transporting in the spring of 1945, it was important enough for the Reich to hide deep within collapsing territory, and dangerous enough for both Soviet and post-war Eastern Bloc authorities to keep it sealed for generations. The tunnels remain closed, guarded, and silent, their contents entombed in the Sudeten rock since the final days of the war. On May 6, 1945, 3 days before Germany's unconditional surrender, a British Army technical detachment attached to 21st Army Group entered the Harz Mountains under Operation Backfire. Their mission was to secure remnants of the V-2 rocket program scattered across the Mittelwerk complex. In the debris of a half-demolished test range near Bad Lauterberg, Lieutenant Jeffrey Ainsworth's team recovered fragments of a project file labeled Project Wotan. The surviving pages, water-stained and partially burned, contained schematics of a rocket guidance array unlike anything employed in the known A-4 V-2 system. Instead of simple gyroscopes and radio correction receivers, the diagram showed a dual inertial guidance core paired with what was described as polar Feldsensor, a magnetic field sensing system that appeared to reference positional data in polar regions. One marginal note read, Arktische Variation minimal. Stabilisierung durch Wotan-Cyclus. The significance was not understood at the time. U.S. Army Ordnance officers, arriving days later, claimed custody of the Wotan materials under Joint Intelligence Protocols. But British MI6 field memoranda declassified in 2001 tell a different story. The documents never reached American hands. An internal note from SIS officer Peter Lascelles, dated May 14, 1945, states, Wotan schematics transferred under sealed order to Canadian Depot per directive. Do not disclose source to U.S. The Canadian connection appears only once more, in a 1954 Royal Canadian Air Force engineering brief marked Top Secret. The brief describes integration trials of recovered German polar navigation prototypes conducted at an undisclosed northern installation, likely Resolute Bay or Alert. It warns of unexpected atmospheric reflection interference during high-latitude tests, and the final paragraph is redacted. Starting in late 1955, Royal Navy and U.S. Navy radar stations along the Arctic Circle began recording unexplained anomalies, transient objects moving against prevailing winds, sometimes vanishing from scopes mid-track. The official explanation blamed ionospheric disturbances, yet Inuit hunters in Nunavut reported finding metallic fragments along isolated shorelines following intense auroral storms. Samples collected in 1960 by the Defense Research Board were never publicly analyzed, but an internal DRB inventory lists alloy composition non-standard, trace elements outside North American metallurgy database. By 1963, Project Wotan had vanished from all known military technology registries. Researchers seeking the original Mittelwerk recovery logs find only cross-references to generic navigation componentry shipments, with serial numbers that abruptly stop in Canadian records. Lieutenant Ainsworth, the man who first handled the Wotan fragments, left the Army in 1947 and refused all interviews. His death in 1982 was accompanied by a sealed will instructing his family to destroy a certain folder without opening it. In 1997, a British Freedom of Information request yielded 2 surviving photographs of the Wotan schematics. Both are overexposed, the text barely legible, but the outline of the bipolar Feldsensor assembly is visible. A ring of antenna-like veins encircling a core unit, unlike any Allied designs from the era. One handwritten note on the margin reads simply, range plus 2,400 kilometers. No drift. The Harz Mountains test site where Wotan was found has since been reclaimed by forest. No official plaque or marker indicates its wartime significance. Locals speak of occasional foreign visitors, scientists who take soil samples and leave quickly. The identity of these visitors is never recorded. Whether Wotan represented an advanced form of long-range missile guidance, a precursor to satellite navigation, or something else entirely is unknown. The combination of magnetic field sensing and polar calibration suggests a capability that would have been decades ahead of its time. Whatever its true potential, the technology was quietly removed from history, spirited away in the chaotic aftermath of victory, its trail ending somewhere in the frozen expanse of the Canadian Arctic. In July 1961, a man identifying himself as Gerhard Keller, age 54, walked into the Bundeskriminalamt, BKA, headquarters in Wiesbaden. He claimed to be a former Gestapo archivist who had served under the Reichssicherheitsamt, RSHA, until April 1945. Keller carried a battered leather satchel containing photographs, carbon copies, and one original ledger, which he alleged documented covert liquidation operations in neutral territories during and after the war. BKA officers noted that the ledger's columns listed operation codenames, dates, target identifiers, and status notations. Some dates extended into late 1946, a full year after the official German surrender. The target locations were striking: Stockholm, Zurich, Istanbul, and Lisbon. Each entry ended with the term finalisiert. Keller told investigators these were assassination operations sanctioned by an obscure RSHA branch known internally as Referat 12B. He alleged that the unit survived Germany's defeat, functioning as a clandestine network within displaced intelligence circles. The ledger's authenticity was provisionally confirmed by handwriting analysts familiar with wartime RSHA documents. BKA internal memos, later leaked, record a plan to quietly pass the material to the Gehlen organization for further assessment. Before this could happen, Keller was found dead in his Frankfurt apartment on August 2, 1961, the cause officially listed as suicide by hanging. Neighbors told police they had seen two unknown men entering his building the evening prior. No formal investigation followed. When BKA archivists went to collect the ledger from evidence storage, they found the satchel missing. The logbook recording access to the evidence locker for the previous 48 hours was also gone. A single microfilm frame, discovered months later in a Zurich safety deposit box registered under an alias traced to Keller, remains the only surviving piece of the document. The frame shows a typed directive bearing an unfamiliar Reich Eagle variant and the title RSHAB/Referat 12B, Sonderanweisung 24. The text, partially legible, orders continuation of special measures in designated operational zones, regardless of political developments. Attempts to locate further records on Referat 12B in the Bundesarchiv have failed. Requests to the CIA and MI6 for wartime or post-war files yield standard denials. However, declassified Swedish Säpo security service reports from 1947 make oblique references to foreign agents with Gestapo affiliations involved in the disappearance of a Baltic shipping magnate in Stockholm. The case was marked closed for reasons of state security. In 1972, a retired Gehlen organization officer, speaking off-record to a West German journalist, claimed that 12B was tasked during the war with politically sensitive eliminations in countries where open military action was impossible. He alleged that after 1945, surviving members offered their services to various intelligence agencies, operating as deniable assets in Cold War proxy conflicts. The journalist's notes, preserved in his estate, described the officer's demeanor as genuinely afraid, and mentioned that the conversation ended abruptly after a phone call to the officer's home. No known photograph of the complete ledger exists. The only public clue to its contents, aside from the lone microfilm frame, comes from Keller's initial deposition at the BKA. He described one operation in Zurich, dated October 1946, involving the removal of an Allied war crimes investigator who was approaching questions that could not be allowed. The investigator's death, recorded as a heart attack, was never re-examined. Today, the official position of the German government is that Referat 12B never existed. Former intelligence officers, however, privately concede that such a unit could have operated, given the chaos of the Reich's collapse. Whether the post-war assassinations Keller described were rogue acts or part of an organized, multi-state cover-up remains unresolved, locked in the missing pages of a ledger that no agency will admit to holding. The archives close with a shudder, but the air beyond them is still poisoned with what they concealed. Somewhere, a sealed crate gathers dust, a cipher turns in its socket, and a name, struck from the record, waits to be spoken again. The war's shadows have no calendar. They will outlive us all, patient and untouched, until someone dares to open the wrong door.